Another intrinsic element of Islam and Islamic law is Jew hatred, or anti-Semitism. It is intrinsic. It began, we were talking about this when we talked about Nazism and World War II, remember? It is spreading, is finding a resurgence across Europe. After World War II, there was a lot of guilt across Europe for what had been done to the Jewish population, the extermination and the Shoah of the Jewish population of Europe. And anti-Semitism, at least publicly, was tamped down for a time. It is now resurgent, not just in Europe, but in the United States, as we'll see. If you recall, over the time period between December '08 and January of '09, Israel invaded Gaza to stop the constant rocket barrage of its towns and cities from Hamas in Gaza. Well, that sparked uprisings, demonstrations across the world. Here are some of the slogans that they were chanting right here in the United States on the streets of America. Slaughter the Jews. You know the phrase, Khaybar or Khaybar, Ya Yahud, Jaish Muhammad Sayayud, English, the Jews, the army of Muhammad, will return. Has to do with the early days of Islam on the peninsula, it became the Arabian Peninsula, when Muhammad was in the process of obliterating the Jewish tribes that lived there, which he did. And some of them had first fled to this oasis farming community called Khaybar, and they thought they'd be safe there, away from him. But no, his armies followed, and that's where the term comes from. He followed to Khaybar, and he wiped them out. He obliterated their tribe. And that's what this means. And people all over the world in these demonstrations, you can hear them chanting this stuff. Sometimes it's in English, sometimes it's in Arabic. But Khaybar or Jews, the army of Muhammad, will return. What they're saying is, you Jews are going to be wiped out. Images from some of the demonstrations, defacement of the American flag, the juxtaposition of the swastika and the Star of David. Here's the Israeli flag with the swastika on it during a Washington, D.C. Demonstration. All right, another way that Islam and Sharia law is being insinuated into American society, this is through something called Sharia-Compliant financing. It is a kind of banking and financing that, well, it eschews dealing in alcohol or pork products or much risk, as in mortgages or gambling, let's say. These things aren't bad. But the point is that it is an insinuation of Sharia law into the American system. And that's what's wrong, because it's a holistic system. And you can't say, well, just take this little part of it, but the rest doesn't come along. Now, why this is important is that the United States Department of the Treasury is actually actively promoting takaful, Sharia-compliant financing with banking and finance organizations around the country, like Citibank, Wachovia, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, on, and AIG. If you'll recall, in the financial meltdown of late 2008, AIG was going under, and the U.S. Treasury decided to bail them out with our taxpayer money. So we now own AIG to the tune of about 86%, unless maybe they have started to pay back the debt. But what it meant was that we, the taxpayer, took on the ownership of this organization with all of its subdivisions, one of which was completely dedicated to Sharia-compliant financing. So we, the U.S. taxpayer, now own this thing, majority. And what happens with Sharia-compliant financing is not just avoiding trade, business with alcohol and pork and so forth. It also has to do with the donation of zakat. There's an obligation to give 2.5% or whatever of profits annually from the company to zakat. Now, who decides where that zakat goes? An advisory board. Who's on the advisory board? Muslim Brotherhood. Where do you think the zakat goes? Remember, 8 categories? I'm sure the widows get some of it. And here is a photograph, by the way, of Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, he sits on some of those boards of advisors for American companies that have Sharia-compliant finance divisions. He actually sits on some of those boards.